Hey y'all, I'm James Wright. Welcome to my shop. I recently had the chance to purchase a Stanley number 71, and this is a beauty of a plane. This particular one came with the box, and it's a lot of fun to use. But several questions have arisen with, okay, how do you use it? How do you sharpen it? What can the 71 do and the 71 and a half, and all those little things like that. So I just want to take a run through about router planes, what can they do, and how do you use them? So first, let's take a look at the router plane and what exactly is a router plane. Now, this particular one is a Stanley number 71 made in England. They're also made in America, and they're basically identical between England and America. A few variations on where things were sourced, but basically the exact same thing. A router plane in general is a cutting blade that is below the bed, and the cutting blade will be parallel to the bed. This allows you to cut a surface that is parallel to your reference surface but lower down. So if you're doing a groove, or in this case a tenon, you can easily plane off this surface to be perfectly parallel with this surface. Particularly on the Stanley number 71, it's adjusted by loosening this back nut, and then with this knob you can actually raise and lower the blade with small increments and then lock it back up. It's fairly straightforward to use. Some of the handmade ones usually have a screw on the back, and then you just use a hammer to tap the blade into place and then tighten them back down. Now, some of the features, particularly about the Stanley number 71, has this open throat, and this is a space that is all the way open so that when you're actually running the plane, you can see all the way down inside there, and it gives you a little bit more viewing space. The problem with it is now you can't reference off of anything on this side, so if for some reason you're coming over to a corner, you may end up dipping off into that because there's nothing there to support it. Stanley did make this that you can throw in. Oops. And fill that gap and make it a new reference space. This can also be a depth stop, so you can actually set it up to a different depth. I've never actually used it for that, and there's a few other things you can do with it, but the most common thing is to fill that gap so you no longer have the throat. The problem with that is it now fills up this space so you can't see as much as you would have before. Now, the Stanley number 71 and a half doesn't have this raised section. The bed just goes flat across there, so you get that filled in, and it doesn't have this raised up. So some people prefer the 71 and a half to the 71. I like the 71 because it has a few other tricks up its sleeve. One of the other things you can do with the Stanley number 71 is move the blade around to different orientations. So I can actually loosen up this ring, slide the blade out, and put the blade on the back here. Oops, slide that around. And now I have a zero clearance blade on here. So now I can plane all the way up against the wall and nothing will impede the blade. The blade can also be rotated 90 degrees so that you can plane along the edge of something. I've never used it in this orientation. The locking nut does actually stick out a little bit past the blade, but if you were to be running right up against a wall, that might be useful for something. So just one other option you can set it up with. One of the other interesting add-ons you can do with the 71 is to put on this fence. Now you can bolt it into any one of these 4 holes along here, and you can move it all the way up against the iron to about 2 inches away from the iron. And this allows you to actually plane a groove a certain distance away. So for a certain measure, you can actually use this as a plow plane. So I can use the fence to reference off the side of the board, and then run the plane all the way along that groove, and actually use it to plane out that groove. So you can use that to either smooth out the very bottom of the groove, or you can actually cut the entire groove with it. And it's just kind of a fun little feature, specifically if you're ever going to be right up against a tenon and you want the shoulder to be a certain distance in. You can set that fence so that your tenon is a specific distance away from the shoulder. One of the most common uses for the router plane is actually to cause the tenon to be perfectly parallel to the plate of the stock you're using. And you can do this by referencing this piece on the stock and then rocking it into the surface. And that allows you to plane this down to precisely what you want. And so you can slowly work that depth down until you put the blade right into the very edge of your marking gauge line and then do a final clean out so you can get a really nice smooth surface on your tenon. Now, one of the problems with it is that sometimes you have a tendency to rock the router plane off of the surface. So you end up cutting lower and lower out here and higher closer to the shoulder. One of the reasons for that is people like to grab these knobs, and when you grab this knob, you're putting a lot of force down. And so I like to grab the knob that is referencing on the board, hold that, and put a lot of force down. And then on this side, I grab it very low, and with just my fingers, I'll rock it back and forth so that all of my force is in line with the blade as opposed to any of it having a downward force. Another thing you can do to counteract that is to put another board out here at the exact same thickness, and then you can use that to reference off of both of these surfaces. You just have to be careful that this is the exact same surface and that whatever it's sitting on is also parallel, so it causes a few other issues. That's one of the reasons why on the router planes that I make, I don't actually put any knobs on there. And I've had a lot of people saying, wow, I would definitely put knobs on mine. And my answer is no, I really don't have any use for them because that puts all the force rocking forward on the plane or having more down pressure because you're grabbing onto the knob. And so I like to have it very, very simple, and this makes all my force being behind the router plane like this. So it allows me to clean that out a little bit easier. Just one other option to make your own plane just the way you want it. Another very common use for a router plane is lowering out a space, whether this be a groove or a trough or basically this recess for my sharpening stones. This is really nice because you get a clean reference off both sides, and you can make sure that this bottom is really nice and smooth and clean it out very easily. Gives you a perfectly flat surface, so when your stone goes in there, it's sitting flat all the way across rather than being supported by a few odd places. As it comes to blades, probably the most common is your 1/2 inch straight blade. And this is a really nice clean blade. It allows you to get into most any corner and is fairly easy to use. But most new planes will also come with a couple others. Particularly I have this 1/4 inch iron and this plow-faced iron that actually has a 45 on either side. This is very, very nice for coming into things because you don't have to skew the plane to get an odd cut. You can actually just force it right into things. That point also allows you to get into certain corners that this one is just a little more difficult with. You can get also much smaller hand planes that might have an 1/8 inch, or I've seen a 16th inch cutter on some. And I've seen people who make their own, and so you can actually reshape these to be exactly what you want. The head on the top allows you to put it into different orientations, and they're a fairly simple device. Some of the newer ones actually have this foot with a screw in the bottom, so you can remove the foot, making it a little easier to sharpen. Most of the older ones, it's just a single piece of steel, so sharpening this edge can sometimes be a bit difficult. As to sharpening, it can be difficult to try and get at the stone if it's on a base or anything of that nature. And so that's why I actually made this setup so I can fairly easily remove these stones. And then I can set them right down here on the edge of my bench. This allows me to hang the iron over the bench and plane it out. And I sharpen it just like I do any chisel or any other iron, and it allows me to slide it nicely along there. So I will start by flattening out the surface, and this is actually very easy to be done in the holder. And just like any other plane, I keep it flat on there, and I'll slide it back and forth. I usually start with the coarse and then go through it just like I would with any other, and I'll finish it off with a strop. Then, to actually do the bevel edge, I will lean it over the side of the bench and slide it back and forth. I make sure that all of my pressure is down right on the cutting edge because I don't want to be putting any pressure back on this stem, so that it gets me a nice clean flat surface. I don't worry about any secondary bevels on these. I rather just like them to be a straight clean blade, and because of how small they are, they sharpen very quickly. One of the problems with the router planes is if you have a large, long tenon that's sticking out. And if you want a plane like a 4-inch tenon, and you have just this little bit sticking back on here, it's going to be very hard to reference this surface and keep this flat. And so what you can do is use these holes that are on here And I actually have this plate made up that fits the holes. And so I can drop this in and I can put bolts up through the plate into the iron, and this extends the bed all the way across. And I really like this piece. It's a nice piece of riven white oak with a bit of spalting in it, and I use it quite a bit, but this allows me to then reference all the way out here, so the plane is basically off the work, and I can use it then to cut down into the surface. You do have to be careful moving this far out, because it is very, very easy to let this bend or move, and most people make this out of like a 3/4 inch piece, so it's a little bit stiffer. If I'm going to be working that far out, I'm going to be taking more time and doing a few different things. So I like this little 3/8 thick piece. It works fairly well for me. Now, as to other router planes, the Stanley number 71 is probably the most common, or the 71.5 you're going to see a lot. And a lot of the modern planes are based off of these. It's just a good design. But it is very easy to make your own router plane. I made this one in an afternoon. Actually, it was probably about 2 hours worth of work. And I used a chisel that I heated up, bent, and then rehardened it, and put some screws into the back of it. I have a video on how I made this, just quick and dirty. And this was, for a long time, my only router plane until I got this one. It worked great. I love it. And I still occasionally will grab this one instead of the Stanley number 71. This one was recently made by GP Woodworks for a challenge that I have going on, and it's something you can win, but just to show you a slightly different design. And really there are a pile of different designs. I really like this one because they have a very broad face on it, a good feel to it, and it's a nice shape. Some of the old style ones don't have this 90-degree foot on them. They actually just have a chisel sticking through at an angle. And so that angle can go at, it's very steep and cleans it out just fine. A lot of those were called old woman's tooth or other names like that. One of the simplest methods is one that is commonly seen on Paul Sellers, and I'll leave a link to that in the description. He calls it the poor man's router, and it's a really ingenious setup. You just take a simple chisel, you drill a hole through the plate at about 50 degrees, whatever you want, a hole that is slightly thinner than the chisel, and you drive the chisel through so that the chisel basically sticks through the wood, and you can slide the chisel in and out to make a deeper cut. And that allows you to then reference off of this entire face over here and swing it back and forth. And so if I'm going to be doing a large tenon or I need to reach out a long distance, I'm actually going to use this cheap poor man's router and make my own very quickly. Drill out a hole, jam a chisel in there, and I've got a router. It's a very simple tool that you can make fairly quickly. So there is the router plane, particularly the Stanley number 71. This is a joy to use, especially when you have it set up right and everything's running on it correctly. This can be really a lot of fun. So I know there are a lot of things I could have gone into, but I didn't because of time. Please let me know in the comments below what questions you have. I will get back to all the questions and try and answer them to the best of my ability. There are a lot of other links in the description that are other videos that might have to do with the router plane, so go ahead and check those out. Otherwise, that's about it for today. This has been a pleasure to work with, and something I hope you enjoy. So please let me know if you like this. Please hit the like button, think about subscribing, and also feel free to check out one of my other videos. You might find something you like there. And until next time, have a wonderful day.